What exactly should President Trump do about the apparent resistance folks within his own government, within our own government? Michael Bloomberg's jumping in the race to run for president. I'm sorry, we'll talk about that in a few. RBG, her failing health and how you, as a right-thinking American, should handle it. All that's coming up right now on I'm Right. Secretary of the Navy Richard Spencer is out. Let's talk about what happened really quick before we go into what President Donald Trump should be doing about all these resistance folks within the government. Just a rewind. Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher got himself in some trouble in Iraq about something. We don't know whether he did it. You don't know whether he did it. I don't know whether he did it. I will tell you, I followed the trial really, really closely, talked to a lot of people I love within the Special Forces community really, really closely, and the evidence against him was flimsy at best. The Navy hierarchy, keep this in mind, the Navy hierarchy, according to Eddie Gallagher and Eddie Gallagher's attorney and several other people, did some really dirty things to do what apparently looked like was trying to railroad him. I don't know the intricacies about it. I'm not a Navy SEAL. I was always too out of shape to be a Navy SEAL, but that's what people in the know tell me. Now, President Trump steps in because Eddie Gallagher, basically, they dropped all the charges. This is before Trump stepped in. They dropped all the charges really against him, sentenced to 4 months served, and said, okay, you're gone. They had no case. Trump steps in and says, you're not going to reduce him in rank like you're planning on doing. Just leave Eddie Gallagher alone. Now, off of that, we got some rumor mill stuff. I'll go over what happened as far as the rumors go first. First of all, rumor came out that Secretary of the Navy Richard Spencer was going to, he was going to do something about this. He was unhappy. He wanted Eddie Gallagher's Navy SEAL trident taken away. Trump takes to Twitter immediately, says, quote, the Navy will not be taking away warfighter and Navy SEAL Eddie Gallagher's trident pin. This case was handled very badly from the beginning. Get back to business, end quote. Allow me to digress for a moment and give you some inside baseball stuff because who knows more than me? The taking away of a Navy SEAL's trident is not necessarily making them no longer a Navy SEAL. It is something SEALs have told me behind the scenes they do when somebody screws up in some way. There is a laundry list of ways you can screw up. They basically meet as a board. They decide we're going to take away your trident for some time. They may take away your trident forever. I don't know, and you don't know, and you're probably never going to find out because it's such a secretive group what the reason was they were planning on having a review board about Eddie Gallagher's trident. We just don't know. But when the commander-in-chief comes out publicly and says, you're not taking away his trident, that's it. That's when the conversation stops. You see, back when I was in the United States Marine Corps and throughout the entire history of the military, even if a lowly congressman got angry and got involved with something, generals would scramble to make sure he's happy and he's fine. Like, that's the norm. Oftentimes, it made us angry that some idiot congressman had that much authority. Nevertheless, that is the case. When it comes to the commander-in-chief, when he says jump, the entire United States military in one voice shouts, how high? You don't get these little sayings behind back rooms. I don't know if we should do that. President Trump's wrong here. No. You see, that does not happen. There's a reason it basically has never happened. So the long story short, Richard Spencer's out. There was some confusion initially as to whether Trump fired him, whether he resigned. It turned out that Richard Spencer had gone to the White House, promised Donald Trump, hey, let us just do the review board and we'll let Eddie Gallagher off scot-free anyway. Well, that's not what it turns out he told to the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper. Mark Esper says that's a completely different conversation than the one he had with us. You're fired. You have to resign. Of course, as always happens, Richard Spencer resigns and says, quote, it has unfortunately become apparent that in this respect, I no longer share the same understanding with the commander-in-chief who appointed me in regards to the key principle of good order and discipline. The president deserves and should expect a Secretary of the Navy who's aligned with his vision for the future, blah, 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 blah. That's just a nice way of saying, that's a very professional way of saying, I got fired. I'm going to take a little mini hissy fit on the way out the door, but not so much of a hissy fit that you'll get mad and take away my retirement check. We all know what that statement means. Now, setting all that aside, because this is not about Richard Spencer, this is not about Mark Esper, this is not about the U.S. Navy, it's actually not even about Eddie Gallagher. Here's what it is about. There is a reason you have seen 3 years of resistance, internal resistance from government employees against the United States president, against President Trump. Do you remember seeing that against President Barack Obama? Anything like this? President Obama, almost unquestionably, even people on the left would tell you, was a radical choice for president, the most radical maybe we've ever had. Yet there was no resistance. When Barack Obama was putting our hardened warriors in heels, in lipstick, no resistance. Barack Obama could do whatever he wanted. In fact, Stanley McChrystal, a little whisper to a Rolling Stone reporter, gone, fired the next day, never a word from anybody else again. Why? Because Barack Obama did what Donald Trump should have done 3 years ago and what Donald Trump should start doing right now. Barack Obama fired every single holdover as far as ambassadors go from President George Bush. When Barack Obama fired McChrystal, he sent a clear message to every general, admiral, lieutenant colonel, sergeant, whatever it may be, across the United States Armed Forces, and that message was, do not screw with me or your days are done. Those messages may make you uncomfortable, but they're important. You see, we haven't had near enough of this. Richard Spencer better not be the last person that President Donald Trump tells to pack up your stuff and be gone by dinner time today. You want to know why you have people like Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman giving testimony? Every other week there's a new CIA analyst or FBI agent who has to come out and leak things to the press. Donald Trump's the enemy. Donald Trump's sinking the nation. Donald Trump this, Donald Trump that. Do you want to know why? Because not enough people have been fired. You ever heard of decimation? Do you know what decimation is? It's a horrible, ugly practice, certainly not one we need to practice, in reality. The Romans practiced it back in the day. You see, if a unit would practice cowardice or betray its commander, they would draw straws. The 10th man who got the shortest straw would then be beaten to death by all his comrades. Why did they do that? Decimation, see decimal, elimination of 10%. Why did they do that? Well, you only have to have that happen once or see that happen about once until you straighten up. You see, the Jesse Kelly solution for Donald Trump's current problem of this endless resistance within the federal government is quite simple. The next time you have a leak from the FBI, you call in FBI Director Christopher Wray, and you sit him down in front of you and you say, hey, look, Chris, I understand there was a leak. That's fine. The next time there's a leak, 10% of your FBI disappears. The time after that, another 20% disappears. The next leak after that, another 50% disappears until you won't have enough agents to park your fancy car for you when you get there in the morning. Thanks, Chris. Have a nice day. Time to start firing people publicly and embarrassing them. I know a lot of people don't like that. In this touchy-feely age, if we have to play nice. Barack Obama didn't play nice, and he had no resistance within his government. Donald Trump came. For whatever reason, you can blame advisors, you can blame him, you can blame whatever it is. He let far too many of these Washington swamp creatures stay in their soft little chairs and their cushy little jobs, and he's paid the price for it for 3 years now. Tangible wins are off the charts in this presidency, and we've had nothing but impeachment collusion, beginning of the end, whistleblower this, whistleblower that. President Trump, start canning people and stop this nonsense. Again, all of that may have made you uncomfortable, but I'm right. To talk about that, we are bringing on author and all-around very bad dude, Marine Corps sniper, Marine Corps recon, and then he switched to the Army and went Green Beret. Like I said, a very bad dude and author of the Sword of the Caliphate, Clay Martin. Hang on. Well, I'm now joined by a friend of mine, a guy who has forgotten more about the military than I'll ever know. Clay Martin, he's also an author of Sword of the Caliphate. Highly recommend that. He also was Semper Fi, a United States Marine Corps Scout Sniper, Marine Corps Recon. He then went over and decided to become a Green Beret. So like I said, that's probably not a house you want to break into. Clay Martin, you see all this stuff about Richard Spencer over the weekend, and we can get into bigger topics in a moment about what this means for government employees. But the part that really shocked me, honestly, that took me back, was Trump clearly went all in for Gallagher. Before he even mentioned anything about you're not taking away his trident, when the president steps in and says you're not reducing his rank, Gallagher's off scot-free. Anybody with half a brain in the Naval Command would look at that and say, okay, this is probably not a human being, Eddie Gallagher, that we ever need to mess with again. He is protected by God on high. Let's leave it alone. But no, they decided he's going to go before a review board. And honestly, that floored me. Am I crazy?
You said half a brain, so that was obviously applies to nobody in that chain of command, right? I mean, it's absolutely insane. I mean, the United States issues him a pardon, and you still think you're gonna step up and do something? Like that's still the guy that you want to mess with? This poor little chief that tabs his badges and stuff. Like, what made you think that was a good idea?
Well,
I mean, it's completely insane.
What did make him think, though, Clay? Because here's my problem with it. Everybody remembers about the Rolling Stone interview heard round the world where somebody whispers something to a Rolling Stone reporter. All of a sudden, Stanley McChrystal fired immediately by Barack Obama. I mean, it was widely known. Barack Obama did not tolerate any dissension in the ranks, and frankly didn't get much dissension in the ranks, even though he was treating the military like a social justice warrior paradise. It really, honestly, it takes me a bit aback that somebody would even be bold enough to consider bucking the president of the United States on something like this. What does it mean? Do they not respect him? Do they not think he'll fire people? Where's this coming from?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and take a very hypocritical position on this one, because normally, I'm one of those guys that I would like to let the generals fight their war and blah, blah, blah. But fortunately for me, I stopped taking the high road years ago, too. So I'm prepared to rebel in this one, because that's not the system we had. This isn't Sparta, it turns out. We elect a new guy every 4 years. And when he's in charge, what he says goes. So, I have absolutely no idea what these guys were thinking. And, really 2 points about this stick out to me. One, at this point, Trump had to fire him. He had to do something, because he's being disrespected. And as a commander-in-chief, you can't allow that for a second. The second point, just like you're saying there, what were these guys thinking that, this guy probably has Trump's personal cell phone number at this point. They're like tweet buddies and stuff. And they still think they're going to flex on Gallagher and rip his trident. After, not only was he pardoned, but Trump came out after that and said they couldn't reduce his rank. Like, what about that makes you think, like, yeah, we're going to go ahead and do this stuff? It's hysterical, I think. I'm cracking up about it. I'm having a really good time with it.
Yeah, I'm cracking up about it, too, honestly. It's hard to explain to people that at least we're never in how absurd it is and how beyond belief it is. I just want everybody to understand. I mean, you and I were talking about this a little bit off air, that your battalion commander could walk by the barracks and simply say that door looks a little dusty. And the rest of the battalion will spend the next 3 days spit shining all their doors in the barracks room. That is how people move when someone high in the chain of command even suggests something. When the president of the United States suggests something, the worlds move.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. I mean, I think one of the things that's gone wrong here is like bad television. Like, I think people think they've seen too much NCIS, and if it wasn't phrased, that is an order, like it's the Hunt for Red October or something, it doesn't count. That's not the way the system works at all. As like I was saying to you, Barrett, if you're out in the desert with your squad throwing e-tools at the desert tortoises or whatever, the battalion commander walks by and says, Lance Corporal Kelly, I think you should stop that. Can you imagine yourself even reaching for that e-tool again? Not only because the battalion commander might come back in an hour, somebody above you in that chain of command would be monkey stopping you. Your first line leader would be holding you while your second line leader hits you, because they don't want to see that tumble down on them, which is exactly the way it goes. And this guy that was trying to hold the review board, was he like an 06 in the Navy? I mean, an 06, a captain or a colonel for us real forces, is kind of a scary dude in most of the military, but he's barely qualified to get coffee at the Pentagon. What makes that guy think that he's going to buck the sink? The commander-in-chief sitting at the big boy desk in the White House. But so I think Trump went exactly the right way with this one. Going to the Secretary of the Navy was the right answer. And I absolutely hope that he sent out a message to everyone below that, like, who's next? Because, we can do this all day long.
Yeah, I tend to agree. All right, look, we're going to take actually a quick detour here to some foreign policy stuff. I saw, it was just a quick headline this morning. I didn't dig into it because I don't do research for the show. But I saw that there was some sort of an ISIS resurgent of some kind in Syria. And in Iraq, I saw that Iraq, I believe it was their intelligence chief, is already warning, hey, we're seeing these things rumble again. I will tell you, the normal American who doesn't follow this stuff closely looks around when they see these headlines and think, wait, I thought they were all gone. I thought we defeated ISIS. Clay, what's the real skinny as far as their capability to come back? Are they coming back? What do you know? You're the one who spent 9,000 years killing people overseas.
Man, I think the problem we have with this one, it was the same problem we had when bin Laden was killed, the same problem we've had now when Baghdadi's killed. And again, it goes back to like television and video games, or, just the American people that haven't spent all this time fighting this war. Like, you don't just kill the head bad guy and the rest of it falls apart. Like, what was that TV show with the Night King and all that? You don't just stab the main bad guy and everything else just shatters and ends. It doesn't work that way. These guys, they've built in kind of a chain of command in the same way that it works for us. Like, if your division commander gets killed, well, then the next regimental commander steps up, and so on and so forth, down to, I saw actually in the early days of Iraq, a corporal that was a company commander. And these guys are going to follow that same model. Now, they're going to be less effective and they're going to be less dangerous and less capable of recruiting the more of their head bad guys that we kill. I mean, the Baghdadi raid, still one of the greatest things that we've ever done as a nation. That was absolutely awesome. But it certainly doesn't mean that the war is over. This is unfortunately one of those conflicts that America's not good at fighting. Like, the only thing that you can really do once the genie's out of the bottle is just whack-a-mole from now on. Keep your little ninjas out there. And the other good thing about that is keep your ninjas fresh. Like, they got to have something to do. You can't just have these guys sitting around Fort Bragg, police calling cigarette butts and stuff. They need somebody to kill. So this is kind of fun for them.
Yeah, that's true. Look, we don't want those guys getting, in trouble back here in the States. And we all know what happens when highly trained military personnel have too much time on their hands and no bad guys to chase down. So what do you mean by we're not good at fighting this kind of war? Because I hear this from you high-speed types all the time, that just in general, while obviously the high-trained guys are built for that, but as a nation, maybe philosophically, we're not really great at fighting terror. Why aren't we?
Well, a lot of that goes back to, even the way that the wars happened when we were kids and Ronald Reagan was running the show. Do you remember a single conflict, at least that you saw on TV, that lasted over like 48 hours? Just Cause down in Panama, Haiti, the Gulf War. But the actual reality is there was all kinds of dirty stuff going on in the 80s. We were in Nicaragua for years. We were in Colombia, like, actually fighting against like Pablo's guys for years. Just we did a better job of keeping it quiet. And the casualties were small enough from those conflicts that people didn't really notice it. It didn't disturb mom and pop going to, Cracker Barrel or whatever. It wasn't super expensive. It just took a long time. There was a very limited number of guys that did it. That's kind of actually the story of insurgency. There's no such thing as an insurgency ever that's been won quickly. It just doesn't work that way. You have to stay at it, and it takes a lot of time. And, unfortunately, one of the less cool things than just shooting people is you have to stay there and grow relationships and work on your intelligence networks, all the nerd stuff. So really, if you want to win one, you need to be in it for 20, 30 years. It's just the only way that it can be done. Unless you want to go full Roman, punitive expedition, which I support.
Yes, as I know you do. Clay Martin, retires SF guy and now author of some really sweet books. Highly recommend those. Clay, thank you for giving us a little time tonight.
Hey, thanks, Jesse.
Coming up next, we're going to make fun of Michael Bloomberg. That'll be fun. Hang on. Michael Bloomberg, the diminutive former mayor of New York City, billionaire, guy obviously runs Bloomberg News, who has since announced they won't be covering any negative stories about him. I'm not sure how that's supposed to work. Either way, he's officially announced that he is running to be president of the United States. Again, I do not know what it is with these New York City prickly pears who think they're going to be president of the United States, but let me tell you something, people. Michael Bloomberg is most definitely not. But in the interest of fairness, not that I have any interest in being fair, but look, we're going to be nice today. It's a Monday, it's Thanksgiving week, so we're going to show you Bloomberg's, opening campaign video. Here it is.
Mike Bloomberg started as a middle-class kid who had to work his way through college, then built a business from a single room to a global entity, creating tens of thousands of good-paying jobs along the way. He could have stopped there. But when New York suffered the terrible tragedy of 9/11, he took charge, becoming a 3-term mayor who brought a city back from the ashes and brought back jobs and hope with it, creating tens of thousands of affordable housing units so families could have a decent place to live, raising teachers' salaries and kids' graduation rates, and creating a more open and livable city for the millions who call it home. He could have stopped there. But when he witnessed the terrible toll of gun violence, he put his money where his heart is, helping to create a movement to take on the NRA and the politicians they own, to protect families across this country and help turn the tide. And he's funded college educations for thousands of deserving low-income and middle-class kids, and supported life-saving medical research, and stood up to the coal lobby and the outright denial of this administration to protect the only home we have from the growing menace of climate change. But now he sees a different kind of menace coming from Washington, so there's no stopping here. Because there's an America waiting to be rebuilt, where everyone without health insurance is guaranteed to get it, and everyone who likes theirs can go ahead and keep it. Where the wealthy will pay more in taxes, and the struggling middle class will get their fair share. And jobs that just allow you to get by will become jobs that let you get ahead. Mike Bloomberg for president. Jobs creator, leader, problem solver. It's going to take all three to build back a country.
Okay, it's a standard campaign ad. I don't know what it is with that horrible music that sounded like a kindergartner was on one of those little gong things. And it's also a little weird that Michael Bloomberg can never seem to smile, even in his own campaign ad. He's a New York City billionaire. He doesn't relate to anybody. He's short. And you could say, Jesse, that doesn't matter. Ladies and gentlemen, history does say that matters. You see, it's one thing to look nice and pretty on a commercial like that. It's another thing when you're standing on stage and you come up to Donald Trump's knee. But that's not going to be a problem either, because the guy has so many opinions. What are two of the things Americans love more than anything in the world? Guns and junk food. And Bloomberg wants to ban both of them. But what's one thing he doesn't have a problem with? Apparently, he doesn't have a problem with communism.
So the United States currently accounts for about 15% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Yes. China accounts for roughly 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. How do we, even if we get to net zero and we're doing our part, how do you account and how do you get China, India, and the other countries to be good partners?
China is doing a lot. India is doing some, but I think that China is doing a lot. Yes, they're still building a bunch of coal-fired power plants.
And they're still burning coal.
Yes, they are. But they are now moving plants away from the cities. The Communist Party wants to stay in power in China, and they listen to the public. When the public says, I can't breathe the air, Xi Jinping is not a dictator. He has to satisfy his constituents, or he's not going to survive.
He's not a dictator?
No, he has a constituency to answer to.
He doesn't have a vote. He doesn't have a democracy. He's
That
not
doesn't
held
mean he can
accountable by
survive
voters.
if his advisors
is the check on him just a revolution?
You're not going to have a revolution. No government survives without the will of the majority of its people.
Yes, you heard that, all you poor communist citizens around the world. Why don't you just chip in and let the guy know you're unhappy? Communist leaders are always so cool with that. Gosh, what's the worst that could happen? Oh, but you thought I was kidding about the junk food ban? Here's Mayor Bloomberg on his war on soda.
And so while other people will wring their hands over the problem of sugary drinks, in New York City, we're doing something about it. The Board of Health's limit on the serving size of sugary drinks does not limit anyone's consumption. It just requires them to think about whether they really want more than 16 ounces.
Yes, this campaign's going far. Look, I'm not even going to play all the videos. The guy has campaigned against earbuds. You know, those things every person on earth wears now. The guy actually campaigned on turning hot dogs into tofu dogs. I'm not making this up. Look, Michael Bloomberg is not going to be president. He's not going to be the Democrat nominee. But this isn't really about Michael Bloomberg. What it is about is Michael Bloomberg is a perfect example of bubble living, of what it's like for so many of these people. A New York City billionaire, he simply has no one in his life that will stand up and say, bro, you don't have a chance. And I'll tell you something else this is, something you're not going to hear anywhere else. This is a copycat thing. You notice how when Barack Obama jumped into the primary, let's rewind just a little bit, when he jumped into the presidential primary, everybody in the world said, he has no experience. What's he doing? Who's this freaking guy? He's never had a real job. He's been in the Senate for about 5 minutes. And then he went on to become president. What have you seen in every single presidential primary from then on? About 95 candidates in the Republican primary and the Democrat primary. Why is that? Because we live in a copycat society, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone looked around and thought, well, I'd like to be president. Yeah, I've never done anything. Neither had Obama, and he got to be president. So everyone just jumps in the ring and runs for president. You remember that idiot from California, Swalwell? Everyone does it. Well, this is the Donald Trump factor, and rest assured, Michael Bloomberg will not be the last one to do it. He looked around and saw Donald Trump's president of the United States, very likely on his way to be a two-term president of the United States, and thought, you know what the American people want? They're ready for a rich guy. Well, look, the American people are okay with the rich guy, but you have to do two extremely important things if you're going to be a super rich guy running for office. One, you have to not apologize for being a rich guy. People think you have to do what Bloomberg was already doing in the commercial. I mean, we can punish the billionaires and rich people suck. I mean, I kind of suck. Donald Trump never did that. Love him or hate him, the guy was awesome. But yeah, I'm flying in on the Trump jet. Just flew in from the Trump mansion, playing golf on the Trump golf course. Here's my supermodel wife. My life is awesome. People love it when you just own who you are. Bloomberg will never be able to do that. Two, there is no ability in politics, and this is where Bloomberg is really going to die. There is no ability in politics like relatability. Yes, you can say, well, no one can relate to Donald Trump. He's a New York City playboy. The guy grew up in construction, and I will tell you, all my construction friends I grew up with, they all loved him. He spoke their language. Bloomberg doesn't speak that language. He looks like an angry, nasty rich guy who's going to stand up on the podium, scold you and me for how we're living, and then fly off in his helicopter with the Russian bikini team. That's not relatable to anybody in the world. Michael Bloomberg is never going to be president, ever. Coming up, author and political analyst Gianno Caldwell is going to talk about his new book, Taken for Granted. That's all coming up next. Welcome back. Joining me now is political analyst and author of the smash new success. The book is called Taken for Granted. His name is Gianno Caldwell. Gianno, Michael Bloomberg thinks he's going to be president of the United States. I say that's madness for a man who is about as likable as a prickly pear cactus, and he's about 5 feet tall. Am I crazy?
Right. His money likes him, though. That's the thing. That's the only difference. But you know what? I think for Democrats, they're very concerned, as they should be. This is a guy who could potentially buy them out of a opportunity. But the truth of the matter is, if he's facing Trump, there's no way that he can win. In my opinion, in my humble opinion, there's currently no one in the Democratic field that can beat Trump in a head-to-head matchup. Now, I know the polls may say something different, but when you look at a person of President Trump's caliber, his energy, the way he can entertain a crowd and hold their attention, there's nobody on that side that can do that. And that certainly helped him in the 2016 election. And I believe that's going to help him in the 2020 election. And to further that point, that's why you saw so many establishment figures within the Democratic Party saying we need new blood. We need somebody exciting to come into the race. And that's why you see latecomers like Michael Bloomberg jumping in.
I tend to agree. I think a lot of these latecomers are basically the Democrat Party pushing the big old fat panic button that, oh my goodness, all these candidates suck. We better do something. Now, back to your book, Taken for Granted. What does that mean? Who is taken for granted and why?
Well, I'll tell you really quickly. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, extremely poor, lights, gas, and water off at the same time. Mom addicted to crack cocaine. I got involved in politics when I was 14 years old because as I was riding through the area of Chicago called Inglewood with my grandfather, we see a lady who looked drugged up and beat down, and I just knew it was my mother. I began to tear up, and my grandfather saw me, and in his very southern voice, he says to me, "What's wrong with you, boy?" I said, "This lady." At that point, I realized it wasn't my mother, but it certainly could have been. What can I do to prevent this from happening? And he begins to tell me about the power elected officials have. And that very next week, to create change in those kind of conditions. And that very next week, I started volunteering for my local alderman. And at that point, after being involved with the Democratic Party and seeing how things work, I realized that so many people were taken for granted by the Democratic Party, which amasses 90+% of the African American vote. But yet and still, every year they come in election time, same song and dance, shucking and jiving, and nothing changes. This doesn't just happen within the Black community, say on the south side of Chicago or somewhere in the inner city. This also happens in the Appalachian region. Democrats have taken white Americans for granted. Those who are in these areas of West Virginia, Kentucky, these particular areas that the Democratic Party used to depend on their support, but now Trump got them. These are the same individuals when Trump said, "I'm bringing your jobs back from overseas, your manufacturing jobs," they call him a liar. Well, in 2018, he created over 500,000 new manufacturing jobs. This president has changed the entire dichotomy of the political system by amassing accomplishments that we hadn't seen from one president in one term in a matter of 2 to 3 years. It's amazing.
He has, and look, I need your expertise on something like this, especially being a Chicago guy and being a Black guy, because look, I'm as white as rice. When I see the economic performance right now, and like you said, it's in the poor white neighborhoods too, because that's where I grew up. It's in the poor Black neighborhoods. It's across the economy. Everybody's back to work again. But I think voters think, or at least political people like you and I tend to think that, well, voters are just going to vote on that. But they don't always do that, at least not right away. My question to you is, how fast is Trump moving the meter in those poor communities, in Chicago, in, like you said, the poor white neighborhoods? How fast are people waking up, or are we still going to take a lot of time?
Well, here's the thing. Change does typically take time, but he's created a lot of deliverables to advocate for that change, or to rather demonstrate what he's been able to do effectively. You talk about just simple facts, especially for African Americans, because that's one of the key demographics that people talk about. This is the key demographic for anyone to win in the Democratic Party. It's a key demographic. You got to lower that number and either bring them over to the conservative side, where it be Donald Trump, or they don't vote at all, or they become independent folks where they just say, "What's in it for me?" which I think is the best strategy. Don't have political allegiance to any particular party. I'm a conservative. I'm going to stay a conservative. But own your power is what I think. So you can talk about the fact that he's had the lowest African-American unemployment rate on record. You can talk about the First Step Act, which released thousands of people from jail, 90% of those folks being Black, reversing the draconian effects of the 94 crime bill pushed by Joe Biden, Hillary, and Bill Clinton, which created the mass incarceration generation in the African-American community, and certainly took fathers out the home. You can talk about the opportunity zones, 9,000 of those in mostly marginalized zip codes, but mostly African-American. You can talk about any number of things, 7 million job openings, not enough people to fill them, over 6 million jobs created. If you look at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, from 2016 up until now, over 1.3 million jobs added to the economy for African Americans. These are very targeted deliverables. This is an approach he can take to people all over the country, whether you be a farmer, whether you be in manufacturing, whether it be a coal job, whether you be an African American, and say, "Listen, you gave me 4-year term. In 2 to 3 years, look at what I've been able to deliver. We have much more work to do. That's why you must elect me for a second term." If you look at the latest polling specifically for Black men, 32% of Black men now approve of Trump. They support Trump. This isn't something that's just made up out the sky. This is a legitimate poll. They said in 2016 he would get 0 Black support. He got 8% for African Americans in general and 12% for Black men. more than Romney and John McCain. So this is something different here. This is a different breed.
You mentioned starting out as a Democrat early. What did you see, or was there a moment? Was there a candidate? Was there a class, a book? What was it for you that snapped and you're like, hey, I'm switching, or in the very least, if not switching, I'm going to start looking into this a little bit more and thinking for myself? Or was it more of a long process?
Well, I write about it in my book, Taken for Granted, How Conservatism Can Win Back the Americans That Liberalism Failed. It was a moment that I had on a street corner in Chicago. I was debating an African-American gentleman who was a senior, and I pontificated on things that I heard in the community growing up. All Republicans are racist. That's what we were taught growing up. It didn't matter if you were a good Republican or whatever. The word was all Republicans are racist. It's the party of Jim Crow. It's the party of slavery. All these things that happen to be not true. They're lies. And this is the way Democrats have been so effective and strategic in locking people into this particular value system. Because if you view the Republican Party as the boogeyman, why would you ever want to learn more? So I was pontificating those particular views, and this guy challenged me. He said, don't you know that mostly all African Americans were conservative Republicans? Don't you know that the Republican Party, how it was started? Don't you know that MLK was a Republican? So I said, okay, this guy's lying to me. Like, he's simply trying to bamboozle me. I've never heard this before. No one's ever said this before. So it couldn't be true. I'm challenged like that. I go and research so I can have a stronger argument for later. And I realized at that point, by simply Googling differences between Democrats and Republicans, the Republican Party was started in 1854 in opposition to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which wanted to expand slavery. Every civil rights bill that was ever passed, including the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that was the one of the policies of Lyndon B. Johnson, only passed because of Republicans in the Senate. Democrats in the Senate didn't want to support it. So every legislation, civil rights bill, was passed because of Republican support. That's the only way it got across, whether it was sponsored or because Republicans were the one that fiercely sponsored it. So these were things I hadn't heard of before. Ideology of a conservative. I come from a very religious background, pro-business. My grandfather on my dad's side is very pro-business. These are things that I took in and I said, wow, this is me. Then it was months of depression because I said, how can I be one of these guys? And then I acquiesced finally and got involved in the party. Got involved and started making change.
I'm glad you got out of that funk and started writing killer books. Like Taken for Granted, people, it's killing it out there for a reason. Cannot recommend it highly enough. Gianno Caldwell, thank you for giving us some time tonight.
Thank you. And thank you. And I want to encourage people to follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Gianno Caldwell. Thank you so much.
At Gianno Caldwell. Appreciate you, man. Now, Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Thank you, sir.
What should we do? How should you be handling the Ruth Bader Ginsburg thing? Well, we'll talk about what that thing is and how you should handle it. Hang on. Well, Ruth Bader Ginsburg back in the hospital this weekend. They say it's nothing serious. Take that with a grain of salt. But I get people all the time asking me, what do you think about it? What do you think about RBG? What do you think about this current situation? And it is an uncomfortable situation, let's be honest. She's either going to retire or she's old. She's really old. She's been in and out of the hospital. She's possibly in poor health. There is a chance Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to pass away. Now, don't be a piece of trash. You don't root for the death of somebody who isn't trying to kill you. I mean, if it's ISIS, you're welcome to root for their death. Just because Ruth Bader Ginsburg disagrees with you politically doesn't mean you should ever go that low route, just for your own integrity. Say a prayer for her. Say a prayer for her family. Everybody ends at some point in time. At some point in time, I'll be sitting around with my face drooping like a basset hound and my prostate falling out of my slacks. It's coming for all of us at one point in time. But say a prayer for your country while you're at it, because whether she retires or gets carried out the other way, well, do you remember what that Kavanaugh Supreme Court battle was like? Do you remember how ugly and vicious that was like? People, that was a pillow fight, a grade school pillow fight compared to what it's going to be when the leftists are staring another 30 years of conservative control of the Supreme Court in the face. That is the part I'm looking forward to the least of the entire next 5 years, because it is going to happen one way or the other. I assume, I know that's a big assumption, but I assume it's going to happen. And look, that's going to be nasty for America. So, say some prayers. Also, we'll be back with another fresh show tomorrow to entertain you as we head into Thanksgiving week. I might even tell you exactly what you should be eating for Thanksgiving. In fact, I will, because you're almost undoubtedly doing it wrong. I'll see you then.